powered by Riverside.
Welcome. So excited to be here with you today. I am Tiffany Lawrence, the host of the Wealthy Educator Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about 15 things to do to improve your money status today. So, first, I want to talk a little bit about number one. So, number one is work on your mindset. And so when people think about money mindset, sometimes they talk about money psychology. But I like to really to start in a place where we're thinking about your money history. Because what people don't often realize is that how we think about money, how we behave with money, has really come from how we were raised around money, what our parents may have done, what we saw, because they say we catch more than we are taught. And so often the experiences that we've lived through have really shaped how our mind activates around money. One thing that I realized as I got older was that a lot of my decision making around money was based off fear and security issues, because I grew up not poor, but watching my mom work two jobs to support her girls. And I felt like she was working really, really hard, and she was alone, right? She was a single mom raising a kid. And so I saw that as a place that I didn't necessarily want to be growing up. And so a lot of my decision making as a young adult and as a 20, 30-year-old woman was really built on me trying to prevent myself from being in that same situation. And so decisions that I made, going to college even, was really coming from a place of trying to figure out how do I keep myself from going down a particular road. Not that my road growing up was a bad road, it was just a place that I saw struggle. And so even in my marriage, it was a lot of the decisions that I made, even how much money I wanted us to keep in the bank. Even when there were times when we talked about working extra jobs and I was against it because my mom was gone a lot when she was working. So hesitations came because I didn't want us to be away from our kid. And so, like, those kind of things shaped the decisions that I made. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that I was letting how I grew up dictate my choices. And I had to come to a place where I understood how that was affecting me and change how I was not only making decisions, but also limiting my beliefs. And so when I transitioned to talking about limiting my beliefs, as a teacher, I think I automatically thought that if I become a teacher, you're going to be poor. So I had a stepmother who was a teacher. She retired educator, 37 years. And even though I wasn't raised in her house always, I visited a lot, summers, holidays, breaks, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was exposed to what it was to be a teacher. But one of the things that I was thinking was that I don't want to be poor. And I always thought that teachers didn't make a lot of money. And I didn't see how you could build wealth as an educator. And so because of that, I refused to think I was going to go into education, which is very ironic now because I grew up to be a teacher, which was so funny to me. But that was how I thought. And so that limited my beliefs around what was even possible if I went into the classroom. But it also changed the way that I dreamed. And so when I thought about what was possible, you can't really dream it if you can't see it sometimes. And so if I didn't see educators building wealth, I didn't think it was possible. And so what's really cool about the time that we're in now is that people are so much more transparent, that they are showing us that it is possible to build wealth even if you are in education. And that has been game changing in how I shape my actions and beliefs as I started to discover that there was an option to become a wealthy educator. So that was number one. Work on your mindset. What is your money history? Number two was setting some goals, planning for your future. Because once you get your mind right, then you say, okay, wait a minute, there are no limits to what I can dream about. And so you want to start creating some goals. And, when you talk about at work, at school, SMART goals is where you want to be. You want to be building goals, setting goals that are specific, measurable, that you can actually accomplish so you can see the results. And so you want to say, if I want to pay off my debt in 2 years, you want to write that down and you want to say, okay, I know I can put this much away to pay off my debt and I want to meet this goal, and you work the goal and you work the plan. And I find that when you write it down, you're more likely to work the goal. So one of the things that I have done is I have a sheet where it is on my mirror and it has my financial goals and my what I could call wellness goals. And my financial goals used to be it was things like I want to get out of debt. I want to earn a certain income. My personal goals or my wellness goals were I wanted a fit body, right? Exercise so many days out of the week. I wanted to work on my health, my mind, and my spirit. I wanted to speak to certain family members on a regular basis because I wanted to understand that those things were important to me, speaking to my family and making sure that those relationships didn't fall to the wayside. I wanted to speak to certain friends regularly because when you get married, if you know you're a parent and you have a spouse, oftentimes, you just kind of get caught up in life. And I didn't want to wake up one day and look around and say, oh my goodness, like where are all my friends? Because I haven't been, really been nurturing those relationships. And so I wanted to give some examples of my financial goals. I was looking for my sheet from my mirror because I do save them as I go through them. And one of the goals was this was when I was really into Dave Ramsey. So I wanted to get my first $1,000 in my emergency account. I wanted to, I'm looking on this sheet. This was a time, I guess, when we were saving to buy a house. I wanted to save $8,500 for our down payment on the house. I wanted to pay off one of the cars. I wanted to increase my retirement savings in the auto draft. And I wanted to create a 529 account for my daughter that saves $200 a month. And so I accomplished all those goals and then I mark them out as I accomplish them. And what's really cool is I have like several pages of goals, throughout the years that I've changed and edited, when the year changed, and I can see the progress and see the growth in my life. And that's really cool and motivating too, because when you get down and you think, oh, I can't do it, you pull out that old sheet and you say, wait a minute, I already accomplished these things. And that is what's really cool. So that was number two, setting some SMART goals. Number three is be clear on what your income is. I actually have people that I talk to sometimes because oftentimes people come to me for advice related to their money. And the first question I ask is, well, how much money do you make? And most of the time they have a generalized idea, but they're not sure. And oftentimes people don't just have one source of income. Being a single mom, I have, child support. You might have alimony. You might have, your W-2. Maybe you have a side business, and people have money coming in, but they're not really tracking it. They have a roundabout number. And what I found is when they really sit down and try to figure out what they really bring in, they might bring in much more than they thought. And that's game changing when you're talking about planning for financial goals. So number four is learn where your money is going. So once you know what's coming in, you got to know what's going out. So you got to check out what are you spending on. And so the best way for that to me is to actually go to your bank account and really check yourself. Say, wait a minute, I didn't know I ate out that many times last month. And, go through the budget and really walk through what you're spending on to see if you're spending in line with your values. Currently, what I do is I budget before the month begins. And so when I do that, I review, did I spend the money where I intended? So that way I can make sure that if I don't value eating out, I'm not spending a lot of money in that area. Sometimes for me, like I've had coworkers that really value eating out. And so a way for me to balance that has been, I may still bring my lunch and I might still want to hang out with my coworker. But a lot of times what I'll do is say, well, hey, why don't you get lunch and bring it back and we can eat, in the conference room together. And we have the same laughs and giggles that we would have had at the restaurant. Except I didn't have to spend outside of my budget and she got to eat out how she wanted. Number 5, create a working budget. So I use Dave Ramsey. I like Every Dollar, but there are other programs. You have YNAB, you have Mint. Mint and Dave Ramsey, they have free versions. Mint is fine for anybody. What I like about Dave Ramsey is I feel like the Every Dollar app is just easy to use. And so I have had the paid version before, but right now I'm using the free version. And that's basically because at this point in my budget life, I don't think I necessarily need the paid version. But for somebody who wants to have the connection with their bank account, that was just as good of a version as the free version. And so I put everything in my budget. So even when I go to the grocery store, whatever I spent, like let's say I budgeted $500 for a grocery that month, I will subtract out, okay, I spent $150 today. So then that dollar number goes down and you can see that on the app. Give yourself financial security you got to decide, you got to have a safe number. So I feel like so Dave Ramsey taught that you have $1,000 emergency fund. But the reality is only you know what your safe number is. I have found that some people don't feel comfortable just having $1,000. They feel too close to the edge for that. So when I first heard the $1,000, I stuck with it because I was going through financial peace. And so it made sense to me. But I didn't necessarily agree, but I said, okay, he's the expert. I'm in a room full of other people, and the teachers were telling me all these stories about success. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. But as soon as I finished financial peace, we decided to up our emergency fund. And a baby emergency fund for me is 1 month of your expenses. Now, of course, I believe in 3 to 6 months of emergency funds, but 1 month felt really comfortable because if something happened, you could cover something. You could cover something big. You could cover a few little extra things. If you didn't get a paycheck 1 month or your paycheck was late, you could do that. So we moved our emergency fund up to be 1 month of our expenses, but you have to figure out where your safe number is. I know somebody else that thinks she needs a whole year's worth of emergency fund. If that is your priority, then that's what you need to save. Number 7, determine what is a real emergency. I will not tell you how many times when we first started saving, we would get the $1,000 in the bank and then we would say, okay, we need to go. Somebody asked us to go out to eat. Well, we're going to dip into the emergency fund. So you need to decide, and that's not an emergency. So you need to decide what is really an emergency because you need to set some rules around when you can touch your money. So now I only touch my money if it's related to health, if it's related to keeping a roof over my head, or it's related to getting me to work every day. You need to have some rules so that you can manage when you touch that account. And if it's not that, your friend saying, I want to go out to eat, that's not an emergency. A down payment on a trip is not an emergency. What else? Depending on the situation, something's broken in your house is not an emergency. You have to figure out, is that something that you could save for in advance, or do you really need to go in your bank account in that moment to fix? Number 8 is make it automatic when you talk about your savings. And so there was a book, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it was by David Bach. And he talks a lot about making things automatic and paying yourself first. So when you're talking about saving for your emergency fund or anything else, it is so important to make it automatic and to pay yourself first, because that means that you're putting your priorities first. And when you make it automatic, you take the thought process out of it. And then before you know it, you'll say, okay, I'm going to save $50 a month, and it's going to automatically draft out of your bank account. And before you know it, you'll forget that you've been saving $50 all year. And after a whole year, you have a good amount of money in your savings account that you didn't realize that you actually, before you thought you couldn't save that. So $50 for a year, that's $600. That's more than 50% of that $1,000 emergency fund, and that's where you wanted to start. Number 9, you need to know what you owe. So oftentimes when people are starting on their journey to financial improvement, they have to figure out what they owe so they can make a plan to fix it. Now, maybe you don't have any debt, but the average American has debt. And so I had debt. And so we had to figure out a plan. So how you do it, you make a list. You go find all the people that you pay bills to, and you write a list. I prefer you put them in order of highest interest rate to lowest interest rate so you can see it. And there are 2 ways that you can attack it. And I say you attack it the way that suits you best. So the brain in me, because I'm more of a math girl, oftentimes I will start with paying my highest interest rate debt off first. And the reason that I do that is because I am not the kind of person that needs like that constant kind of pat on the back. How they say you do the method where you pay the lowest balance first because you need those quick wins to make you feel good. I don't necessarily need that kind of praise and accolades. I can kind of work the system. But if you know you need the momentum of knowing that you paid something, you can feel the constant like little wins, then you need to go with the method where you pay the lowest balance first. And how that works is, so when you pay the lowest balance first, you're going to pay the minimum on all the cards, and then you're going to decide in your budget, well, how much can I add to that minimum amount? So maybe you can add another $200 a month to debt payment. So then you're going to pay $200 on the lowest balance with the minimum. Then after you pay that card off, you're going to take the minimum plus that $200 and roll it to the next card. And then you're going to take that minimum after you pay it off plus the first minimum plus $200 and then use it on the next card. And eventually you will pay down the debt. If you go highest interest, you're going to take that same $200 and pay it with the minimum of the highest card, and you're going to pay that debt down. Now, the difference is that highest interest rate could be your higher balance, so it may take you longer, but it is going to make you pay less interest over the long run. So you have to decide what works for you. So that strategy worked for me just because I'm always looking at, well, how can I save the most money, right? Learning about your student loan repayment options is number 11. So as an educator, I mentioned before, I had $198,000 in student loans, and I did not take out $198,000 in student loans. I started with much less than that. I actually went to undergrad on a scholarship in the state of Georgia. It was called the Hope Scholarship. I was halfway smart when I graduated. It was not undergrad that really got me into student loan debt. It was grad school and other degrees in order to progress my career in education that really got me into more student loan debt. And then you add the fact that I deferred my loans for a really long time. And what I didn't have a clear understanding of back then was how much my loans would grow from the time I graduated until I decided to pay them. And the reason that I decided to start paying them one day was, well, first, let's start with, I thought I was just going to die with the loan. So literally, me and my husband had decided that we would just pay student loans forever. We would just put in the budget, every house we buy, every car we buy, whatever, we're just going to keep putting it on the side burner. We just going to pay student loans. But then one day I was like, okay, Tiffany, do you really have to pay it till you die? Maybe not. So I actually applied for income-based repayment, And I put us on the income-based repayment plan, and we just paid that amount, just paid it consistently. And then COVID hit, and we had been paying a couple years by then. And then they went on the, we had a where you didn't have to pay anything in your student loans. And the cool thing about that was, as a public servant, if you had been paying, they counted all your payments before. They even counted sometimes if you were late. And the time when we weren't paying, it was almost 3 years of no payments. That also counted in my repayment count. And if you don't know what public service loan forgiveness is, that's when you're an educator, and there are other public servants that qualify, but I'm specifically talking about educators. When you're an educator, you, after 120 payments, which is equivalent of 10 years, and you pay what you're supposed to pay on certain repayment plans, you get your loans forgiven at the end of that 10 years. And the cool thing about public servants is you're not taxed on what you got forgiven, but you do have to keep paying. And so you add the years I had already paid, then you add the years that COVID happened. I ended up with some of my loans really being forgiven at the end of that period. I still have a few loans left because I did go back to school some years ago for grad school, so I had not hit the 10-year mark, but I expect to be student loan debt free by 2026. And so I thank God that I started paying the minimum payment, and I am grateful for the options that the government gave us during COVID that helped me. And now I'm really seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with student loans. But what's important is for you to understand what payment plan you're on, because they're all different. And the one thing that I want to say, when you see a new program come out, don't assume it's the best program for you. Because what I found when I started looking into other programs, when it was when Obama was in office and he made some different payment options. When I researched it, it wasn't better for me to move in the long run. And so, because believe it or not, I had some student loans that had a 2% interest rate. And I don't know how that came about, but I didn't have I think it was like 6.8 or something that were on a lot of student loans. So if you had those loans, it might have been different. But for me, because my interest rates were so low, it didn't benefit me to refinance, consolidate, go into a different repayment option, because I would have ended up paying more than what I actually would have been paying if I had just left it alone. So I left mine alone. The next thing is number 12. So number 12 is, feel like I would like you to experience life without a car note. So I know that there are situations where sometimes we have to buy a car, but I do want you to think twice. And when I say experience, feel life without a car note, I want you to try it, see how it feels. Because once you feel it, I think that's when you realize how impactful having a car note is on your life. I haven't had a car note in, oh my goodness, hold on, it's probably been maybe 6 years or something. And I will say it has been game changing for me. Um, it the things that it allows me to do. I think it's even the reason why I was able to take a really big trip to Hawaii one year. When something happens in my house, I really don't skip a beat, because I typically don't have to touch an emergency fund, because I have that cushion. I can just write a check. That's game changing. And so that's why I say feel life without a car note. And I think it will change your behavior and your decisions around car notes. Number 13, know where you stand with your credit score. So just check your credit report annually, because even though some people say never get a credit card, yada, 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 the reality is we live in a world where you do need credit to do certain things. And so you do have to be mindful of how you build your credit, how your credit looks. And if you are disciplined enough, it may even be that you need a credit card. You have to know that for yourself. You have to know who you are and what you're capable of, in the sense of how you manage yourself. If you are not a disciplined person, you should not have a credit card. But regardless, you need to always know what your credit score is, because you never know when you're going to need it. Because there are times when you do have to make big purchases that do require credit scores. So know where you stand with your credit score. That was number 13. So number 14 is make your savings consistent. So earlier we talked about automation. So one of the things that I do, I typically set an amount that I want to save. I make it automatic and I just leave it alone. I don't go back and change it. I don't look at it all the time. I just let it go. And so, but being that consistency over time, before you know it, you'll look back and say, oh my God, I saved that much money. I didn't even know it. I didn't even feel it because it never hits your bank account. So you're not spending it before it gets there. And so make your savings consistent. And number 15, this is the last thing that I have on my list, and it's prepare for the big stuff. So what does that mean? Anything that you want or you think is going to happen that you can sort of predict, you need to be planning for it. And that's why you need to create sinking funds. And so that could be anything from, you know, that you're, like, for instance, I know my car is older, right? So that means that I need a sinking fund to grow a savings account so that way when I do have to buy a car, it's available for me. Another option might be, you know, you want to take a big trip. I have a big birthday coming up. I'll be the big 4 or 5, and I want to go on a big trip. And so with that, 2 years ago, I knew I wanted to go on a big trip. I know my birthday is coming, so I started saving for that. I even started telling my friends to start saving because I wanted to take a girls trip and I didn't want anybody to say they couldn't go with me. So I said, okay, guys, this is where we going. I had a place. I didn't have dates, but I kind of gave them a roundabout so everybody could be saving for the big stuff. And so I'll say, map out your goals so that you can make a plan for the big stuff, because if I haven't learned anything else in the years with COVID is that life is too short to do nothing, but you do have to plan so that whatever you do doesn't impact your life financially in a negative manner. So that was what I wanted to talk about today. And I am so grateful that you tuned in today to listen to my tips on how to improve your money status. And so please follow me on Instagram, The Wealthy Educator Coach. I am so grateful for you to tune in. Tune in next week with me. Thank you.